Hey guys, it's Amanda. How are you doing? I hope you're all good. If you've been following along, you may have seen that I recently duped the Gemini palette by Melt Cosmetics. Since I am on a no-buy year, I would love to buy it, but I have committed to not spending any money on makeup this year unless it's a product that I really need, such as the new foundation, once I've run out of all of them. But I really enjoyed duping this palette and like seeing what I already had in my collection that was along the same lines. So I thought I would do that again. And the next palette on my list was the Kat Von D Lila palette, which is not out in the UK yet. I'm not sure if it's out in the US. I find it really annoying that palettes take such a long time to come to the to the UK, because it's not that long a flight. You're already spending a lot of time and money on, you know, promoting it in the US. So why would you not be able to release it in all countries worldwide at the same time? But anyway, as I was looking into the Lolita palette, I realized that it's really just a less exciting version of Urban Decay Naked Cherry, which already didn't excite me in the first place. So basically I decided to dupe Naked Cherry instead, because I felt like the shades were just a bit more versatile. I think there's a few more shades in there as well. And also I can actually see it in person because it is out in the UK. So I was able to go and swatch it and make sure that what I am duping is actually fairly close to the original. And then obviously I put on this look again to kind of play with the shades that I had found and see what I could do. So I'm going to show you what I chose first as dupes, and then I'm going to show you how I put on this look. So the first shade, Hotspot, is a fairly standard cream white, which I have a few of and I'm sure that we all do. But the one that I chose for my swatches was In the Buff from the Boudoir Eyes palette by Too Faced. And then the second shade, Caution, is pretty much the same except just a tiny bit more yellow. And I really don't understand why brands do this. I don't know why they think that their customers want to pay extra for two shades that look exactly the same. So, I mean, to me, that's another reason not to buy a palette if I see that there's too many dupes of the same color in the same palette, like hello. The one that I chose as my dupe was Amen from the Saints and Sinners palette, which is also a cream white, but just a tiny bit more yellow than the other cream whites that I have. So for Bang Bang, the dupe that I actually chose was Satin Sheets from the Boudoir Eyes palette again. But when I looked at it a bit closer, I think that actually Vermeer from the Modern Renaissance palette would have probably been a better match. So I don't know why I didn't think of that while I was doing my swatches. For feels, I chose a shade from Gorgeous Cosmetics, which is a brand that was really big in Australia when I lived there. And I've also seen it used by the Kardashians. So I know that it exists in America, but I've never heard anyone talk about it in the UK. And when I was leaving Australia, this was probably in 2015, I think that the brand was kind of on the decline. So I don't even know if it exists yet still. But they had a lot of single shades so you can make your own palettes, which I thought was great. But when I went to actually make my own palette, this is what I made, which is like 4 shades that look basically exactly the same. Which was dumb, but it's great now because this is called Dusty Rose. And I thought that that was a pretty good dupe for feels. So as a dupe for Juicy, I chose Lactus from the Shade and Light palette, I think. I have to admit that because like the shade names wear off on the back, and I don't understand if it's like, does it go the same way, or is it like if you look here, it's then the shade that ends up here. Like, I don't understand how the layout of the shade names is meant to go on the Shade and Light palette. So I think I chose Lactus. If not, I chose this shade, which I guess would then be Ludwin. Anyway, I think it's a bit more orange than Juicy, because Juicy is quite peachy, but it's just not a shade that I enjoy, so I don't have any in my collection. And I think that this is good enough. For Turn On, which is a champagne shade, I obviously chose Stila's Kitten. That is the only champagne that I will ever feel that I need. It's a great shadow, it's great to use as a highlighter. It will probably do your taxes for you, and this is definitely one of those shades that I will continue buying forever. I love the formula of this as well. It's very, very soft, and I don't think that Urban Decay can do it better. Sorry. As a dupe for Ambitious, I picked Rapture from the Shade and Light palette, which I think is a bit more glittery than Ambitious, but they are close enough. I was actually really, really excited about this shade when I first bought the shade and Saint and Sinner palette, but it's proven pretty hard to work with, and yeah, for some reason it just doesn't excite me as much now that I actually have it. So oops. Bing or Ring, I can never remember which it is, and I can't see in any of the photos if it says Bing or Ring, so I think it's Bing. It's a shade that I think is really, really common in lipsticks, but not so much in eyeshadows. So I'm kind of cheating, and I'm using this lip liner from Illamasqua as a dupe. I feel like it is pretty much the same shade. For Devilish, I am using Androgyny from the Androgyny palette. I think that Androgyny is a bit darker, perhaps a bit more like cold, cool purple, but they're still similar enough. And I think that Androgyny swatches a lot darker than it actually is, which is something that I've noticed with all the shades in here. Like even when I swatch it with a brush, I feel like they come out a bit darker than they do on the eye. So once you actually apply it on the eye, I do feel like it's very similar to Devilish, at least as far as I can tell. For Young Love, I'm cheating again, and I'm using this MAC lipstick in the shade Creme de la Femme, at least for my swatches. And later on, when I was going through my collection again, I realized that Rosary from the Saints and Sinners palette is fairly similar. When I was trying these out, it just looked a lot darker because it was dark out, so like it didn't reflect the light for some reason. But I think that would be a fairly okay dupe as well. But I just think that you shouldn't be afraid of using makeup for something that was not specifically its intended purpose. It's really just makeup. You can kind of use it wherever. Like sometimes if you use things around your eyes, obviously it might sting. So I mean, if that happens to you, then don't blame me. But when it comes to lipstick, a lot of the time you can just kind of like smear it on, it's fine. For Drunk Dial, I'm going back to my custom palette, and I'm using this shade, which is called Violet Satin. I actually hate it. I don't know why I bought this. Like, this is not a shade that I would enjoy wearing or that I use ever. And I think that when I bought this palette, I actually already had this shade in another pan from Makeup Store. So clearly I just thought that I really enjoyed like really deep reddish purple eyeshadows. But I mean, as you can see, it's not been used a lot, so I was wrong. And finally, for Privacy, I have used Raisin from the Natasha Denona Mini Lila palette, which I think when I actually applied it on my eye, it came out a bit more purple than what Privacy did. But considering this is like a pink and purple palette in general, I'm gonna call it good, call it a day. I'm fine with that. So I'm gonna do a halo eye-esque look. It's not a true halo eye because I don't think that looks good on me. Like, I don't like a round shape on my eye. So I often like adapt it to kind of bring it out a bit more. But it's, yeah, let's call it halo eye inspired. So I'm gonna start with this shade, Dusty Rose, that I'm using instead of Feels, and place that in the inner corner of my eye. And also bring it out towards the outer corner of my eye. So I'm bringing it up quite high and almost touching the brow. But when it comes towards the brow bone, I'm making sure to keep it a bit lower. So I've put this quite close to the bridge of my nose and quite close to my brow, and not so much on the lid. So when I use my second shade, which in this case is going to be Androgyny from the Androgyny palette, I am going to make sure not to bring it too close to the bridge or to my brow. I'm going to put it more on the lid, and when I'm here underneath the brow bone, I want to make sure not to bring it too high as well. I like that these shades blend so well into each other, but as always I want it a bit darker, so I'm going to use Raisin from the Natasha Denona palette, which I'm using as a dupe for Privacy. So I'm using a smaller brush and just popping it into the very inner corner of my eye. As well as the very outer corner of my eye. And just following the shape here. There's something about certain kinds of pink eyeshadow that kind of makes you look a bit sick sometimes, which can be really fun, and it's a look that I go for sometimes, but when you put on pink eyeshadow and you've forgotten that that happens, it's not great. Now this is quite a lot of pink, so I'm going to break it up with Kitten by Stila, which I'm using instead of Turn On. I'm just going to apply that with my finger in the center of the lid. Not bother putting any concealer or anything underneath. So I started putting the Illamasqua liner that I talked about earlier in my eye, but it just looked like I was sick. I don't know if you can still see. I tried to like wipe it off, but that was not the effect that I was going for. So instead I'm going to use Current by MAC, which is one of my favorite lip liners to use in my eye. And it's a purple. I was thinking that I know that you're not supposed to put red lip liners in your eye because there's something in them that you can react to if you put them in your eye, and I'm not sure if maybe that applies to pink lip liners as well, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. I'm going to use the first eyeshadow as a blush as well, which is something that is great about eyeshadows that come along in a larger pan, which obviously the Urban Decay eyeshadows don't, but there's actually a lot of eyeshadows that you can use as blusher as well. And it's not always the most straightforward colours either. Like I've used pretty deep dark purple eyeshadows as blusher before. Obviously if you're very pale like me, you have to go in with quite a light hand, but sometimes it can be really fun to experiment with what colour you put on your cheeks as well. Now because this is quite a vampy look, I think it deserves some liquid liner. Most of the time when I use Kitten, it's not actually as an eyeshadow but as a highlighter. So that's what I'm going to do today as well. So I normally try not to use a strong eyeshadow and a strong lipstick at the same time because I think it easily becomes a bit too much. But I'm going to use Bond Girl by Charlotte Tilbury today, which I would say is maybe like a neutral berry, if that makes sense. It's quite a dark lipstick, but it is one of my favorites. And even though it's a bit darker, it doesn't tend to come off as like too much. So I'm hoping that it'll be fine. So that's it for my Urban Decay Naked Cherry look. Sorry, I forgot what palette I was duping for a second. I find it funny that this was actually a harder palette to dupe than the Gemini palette, which I thought was going to be more difficult, and I thought for sure that I would have a lot more pinks, but I think that the pinks that I have, they're just not quite the same shades as the Naked Cherry palette, but I still feel like you can kind of achieve similar looks anyway, and the fact that there's two shades in there that are just the same, it just really turns me off. And I don't really understand the Naked Cherry concept in general. Like, it's not neutrals. So please subscribe to my channel if you'd like to keep up with what I'm doing. Leave me a comment or a like if you enjoyed this, and maybe let me know if there's another palette that you would like me to dupe, and I will see you guys later. Bye!